Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kolb, and I want to welcome you to today's Credit Safe webinar. Want to let you know that today's webinar, just like every webinar we do, is one that we definitely want you to be able to participate in and have an interaction with us. We don't want this to just be one-sided. So the way you do that is you go down to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little text bubble with Q&A on there. Feel free to drop a question, a comment, a concern, something, anything in there at all times. I already have that up and I will be monitoring that the entire webinar. So you don't have to wait till the end. There's not going to be a specific Q&A portion of this. At any point that you want to do anything, you just drop that in there and I will go ahead and take those questions. We may not answer them right that moment, but I will make sure that all your questions get answered. Also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. So if you are not able to be on a recorded webinar for whatever reason, company policy, something like that, please let us know and also leave the webinar at this time. But that also being said, you will be getting a follow-up email with the recording, as well as any pertinent links or anything that we mentioned that we'll have that, as well as a link to the speaker's LinkedIn page and everything like that in your email with the email that you provided to us within the next couple of days. So you'll have all that coming up. Don't worry about any of that. And that'll take care of all the kind of housekeeping things that we want to do. And now I want to get into what's going on with this. This is the 7th webinar in an 8-part series that Credit Safe has been doing in joint participation with the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors. The entire series is called Cash is Still King. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you're unfamiliar with either Credit Safe or the NAW, let me give you a little information on both. The National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, or the NAW, is the national voice of the wholesale distribution industry in Washington, D.C. NAW provides high value to its members and the wholesale distribution industry by advocating the interests of distribution companies before the government, providing groundbreaking distribution-specific research and strategic management best practices via conferences, publications, and webcasts, and providing leading-edge products and services highly valued by industry peers. As the world's most used provider of business intelligence, Credit Safe owns and maintains one of the most comprehensive and rapidly expanding business databases with credit information on over 365 million companies worldwide. They're changing the way business information is used by offering a collection of products and solutions that help companies leverage their domestic and international credit reports, company data, principal information, domestic and international judgments, and credit scores to make smarter business decisions. So I'll give you a little information about both the companies that are involved in this, or both organizations. And this focus, the series has been focused on the idea that cash is still king. We all know that 2020 has just changed the game for most companies. It has kind of turned our world upside down. But one thing is still true in business is that cash is still king. If you have cash flow going on, if you have your bills being paid and people are paying the bills they owe to you, then things are going to be going better than anybody else. So that's kind of what we've been focusing on. And so today we're focusing on the idea of overdue payments and collections. This happens especially right now. We've seen a massive uptick in this. There's industries that have never had to worry about this in the past that are now dealing with this on a large scale. And we wanted to talk about this, and we're talking about it in 2 parts. Today's webinar is focusing on the internal perspective. What can your company do inside of your company? How can you handle things inside of your company? And then our next webinar, which is on Thursday, we'll talk about handling it from an outside agency or firm perspective. So if you get a third party to come in, how does that all work and what happens there? So kind of a teaser for today, but also for our next webinar. We're ecstatic to have almost a regular at this point with us in Katie Keach. Katie is the COO of Statewide Tax Recovery and has over a decade of experience in credit and collections. She's worked in a variety of companies, holding various roles from AR specialist to director of credit and collections to now, like I said, as a current role as a COO. Katie's helped businesses across the country build their collections department, create credit policies, train their sales staff and credit associates and collections to work together and kind of work hand in hand to reduce and help them to reduce losses with solid collection practices. When she's not working, which based on that bio is not very often, Katie spends her time with her husband and her daughter in their home in Pennsylvania. So Katie, welcome yet again. We were just talking earlier that it's been you said, oh, it hasn't been long since you've seen me. And then we realized it's been almost a year. We've been in this vortex of 2020. We just don't know.
Absolutely. I can't believe it's been a year since we've been in person together, but it has. And, I'm excited to do this webinar with you today.
Well, we always love having you on. It's always a great time to have you and just to learn. You are no question an expert in your field, and we love getting to learn from you and to get your opinion on things and see all that. We will, even though it is election day, hope everybody has voted or will do so before the end of the day. We will stay away from politics in any other way other than that right there. So I won't be asking opinions on that, but I will be asking a lot of thoughts on kind of the state of what's going on with businesses right now, especially when it comes to credit and overdue payments and all of that type of stuff. So if you're ready, let's jump right in and we'll get rocking here. And if you have any questions or want to add to this, please, like I said, just go ahead and drop a question or a comment in the Q&A portion of your Zoom thing here. So if we're talking about overdue payments, if we're talking about collections, inherent in that is somebody didn't pay what they owed. So, I mean, obviously lack of funds, sure, great, wonderful. But what are really the major reasons that companies, specifically, we're not talking about consumers, but companies don't pay their bills?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you give me 1 second here, I'm just going to pop up.
I will not give you
promise you guys, I only got 2 slides. So I won't bore you to death. But I felt like this one is such a major one. So identifying reasons why customers don't pay. They don't have the money, obviously. We talked about that's just an obvious one.
Right.
But they didn't get paid by their customer is another big one. They didn't receive the invoice. That's, it's one of those things where we think to ourselves, oh my gosh, well, I sent the invoices, they should have received it. They could have had a technology glitch. You could have had a technology glitch. The mail could have got lost. They didn't get their invoice, right? That's one of the bigger ones. The invoice was different than what they were quoted or what they had thought they were going to be paying. That's another one that you hear fairly often is when I originally did the order, I thought it was going to be for this. Not relevant for all industries, but definitely something that, there was a change in my invoice, an added fee or added something. They didn't get the product at all. Another one, they didn't get the service they had, thought they were going to get. They didn't get the product they thought they were going to get. Or wasn't to the standard. That's another one that's not on here really, but it wasn't to the standard of which they expected it to be. I talk about the service wasn't as completed as expected, but maybe it wasn't to the standard. The product was damaged if it came, or the service just didn't meet their expectations. And those are the really top ones. The list obviously goes on, but those are really the main ones that you hear of why customers don't pay.
Okay, and I'm gonna jump in here because I got a question already, which is great. We want this interaction, but I'm not 100% sure.
Let's do this.
I know, but I'm not 100% sure what this person is asking. So I'm gonna call you out. I don't always do this, but Karen, you say, what about sales tax? And I'm not sure if you mean what about sales tax as in, is that included as a reason they wouldn't pay, or are they not trying to pay the sales tax, or do we include that? If you could give me a little more info, I am happy. Okay. So people are not paying the sales tax when it was on the invoice. Have you seen this before? Is this something that you've had to experience there, Katie, or is this?
I'm not super familiar with it, although I know that there's different products and services that have to include the sales tax depending on the state that they're in.
Right.
So yes, absolutely something you can see is a fee or a tax that was added on that they didn't take into consideration would be a part of their bill. Could definitely be a reason that the customer didn't pay.
Okay, she's saying that customers are not providing resale certificate at the time of order. Yep. So there we go.
They don't get the ability to know that the sales tax needed to be added, and then it comes on the invoice. Sure, absolutely, another good point.
Yeah, great point there, Karen. Thank you for giving more information there, because I was a little confused. I apologize.
Thanks for Karen.
Yeah, and at any point, if you have those questions, please come in. So I mean, there's a host of reasons, and I mean, you've been in the industry a lot longer in that area than I have, and I know as a business owner in the past having some of those hit me and being like, no, I'm not paying you because this didn't happen right, or something was wrong here, or or I haven't gotten paid yet, I don't have the money, or whatever, but again, we're in this vortex of this year. Has this changed in 2020, or are we just seeing the same thing just on a loudspeaker?
Yeah, that's a great question. Has it changed? I think it has. From a perspective of, and I talk to people every day, all day about various experiences that they're seeing. And, one of the things that I'm hearing is, well, this wasn't an issue. This customer wasn't an issue for me previously. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we've never lived through a time like this. There's no ancestor, in my personal opinion. Obviously, maybe people feel differently, but I don't think you could go and talk to a relative and says, yes, I've lived through a pandemic exactly like what you're going through, and here's the playbook for it. So absolutely, I think that the conversation is different today. I think people are experiencing, the customer who's always paid them. Maybe that meat packaging plant, for example, the larger manufacturers who haven't had issues previously, but now are having supplier issues. Therefore, they're having issues collecting on their invoices as well.
Right.
It's one of those things where I think this is a very different time than any of us have ever experienced.
Okay. And I mean, we understand it's a different time, and we understand there's things going on. But at the end of the day, I need to get paid. If if I've sent you a bill, I still need to get paid. So do any of these even really matter? Does it matter why they're not paying you?
Yeah, absolutely. It matters because you want to understand the approach that you want to take with them, right? So if it's as simple as, let's use the example of a dispute, something that they just don't agree with what you've sent them, or again, product service didn't live up to what they were expecting. And so at this point, they're looking for you to hear them out, obviously, for the first part, do your research, and then come to them with a some sort of compromise. I think that's, and that's a different situation than just saying to you, well, going back to our first point of that bullet point of that PowerPoint, which was, I didn't have the money to pay, right? So I think if you're talking about understanding what it is that you didn't meet them on, or they didn't feel that you met them on, what's the compromise? You don't want to see it go south. You really obviously want to try to salvage the relationship. You certainly don't want them to never do business with you again. Again,
Sure.
I'll relay back to being in COVID. This is not the time to be losing the customers, right?
Right.
So we definitely want to make sure that they're doing business with us in the future. And when it comes to understanding why they can't afford to pay, that's having your eyes and ears open to coming up with a solution, that works for both sides. Really, again, my familiarity is with, how do I come up with a plan that the customer can afford to pay, and I can afford to live with, and for what time frame can I do that in? So I think I hit the nail on the head with that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes back to that idea. You've talked about it in the past. We were talking about it before, of like, and all of you Covey fans will understand, you got to begin with the end in mind. But how does that work with collections? I mean, like, my end is simple. I want my money. I mean, it's not that hard, but like, from the way you explain it, and you've talked to me about it in the past, that there is a difference there. And I'd love for you to kind of expound on that, because I think it goes hand in hand with what you're saying right there about why these things matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my key phrases is definitely begin with the end in mind. I love that you remember that, by the way. It's really important that you are going into the relationship with getting signed paperwork, right? That you have an agreement, a service order form of some kind, service agreement of some kind, where you have an exchange of commitments, and your expectations for that is, I'm going to sell you this, or I'm going to do, provide this product in exchange for this on this term. And then you want to talk about how you're going to get them the invoicing. What kind of terms are you going to give them? How are you expecting payment? And if you are covering that on the front end of the deals that you're bringing on board, then you are already out of the gates ahead of the game. And well, the reason I say that is, one, you're not having conversations after the fact of how are they going to pay you. You're not having conversations of what should the terms be, because again, not everybody, not everybody's going to fit into a net 7 or a net 14 or a net 30. You need to understand each other's businesses to understand what you're willing to extend to them and what they need in return. Again, a healthy dialogue. So those are kind of just nuggets that, you know, at the top of my head, why I think it's important to start with the end in mind is because you don't want to have a situation where you don't know what kind of payment terms they needed. I don't know if I got them the invoice because we never talked about how I was going to invoice them, right? We never talked about what kind of billing method they needed and how they were going to pay. If you get those four things off the list right out of the gates, now you can figure out, okay, is this a financial problem or is this in fact a service or product issue that we didn't meet their needs?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think going, I just going to kind of pull two things out of that. One, you kept saying relationship, and to me, I don't care whether it's collections or sales or credit or just business in general. That's where everything matters. You know, if you're not building that relationship, not saying you're besties and are attending each other's weddings or anything, but like you need to know what's going on with them. You need to know how the business is affected by different things and what's happening there. But then also you've got that intermixing of those things, and we've actually had you on to talk about this before, but like sales and collections and credit and all the different finance department, all that stuff kind of gets all put together, and like, hey, if we're not all on the same page, it's not going to happen. So go give me a little bit more about that. I know you talk about this and we have done whole webinars with you on this. So let's not go so deep, but give me a little bit of how that looks across the board and how important it is when we're talking collections to have started that from the sales side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're bringing on the customer and you don't have an exchange of commitments, and let's go back to talking about an agreement, a service agreement, a service order form, whatever it is you're looking at, you don't, when you get to third party, which again, I don't want to talk about third party because I don't want to see my customers end up in third party. But you definitely have to be realistic that if it goes that route, you certainly don't want to be there, for lack of a better term, caught red-handed without having the right paperwork, without having the agreement.
Right.
If you're not owed that money, you're going to have a really hard time getting an agency to collect it for you. But if you start with the end in mind and you work with your sales team to, again, and I talk about this really in depth in our other webinars, right? But let's work together, not against each other, because if we work together, we can accomplish more. And the reality is, I want to see you succeed. But we have to make sure that it's not at the expense of, we can't collect on this. And I know that I've had a bunch of people reach out to me since our other webinars that said, hey, I've taken some of those tactics and I've implemented them in my company, and I can't thank you enough. They're working together stronger and now united versus against each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where, we've had folks that have reached out to me with these webinars and stuff that go, yeah, but we're such a small company. We don't have a collections department. We don't have this department or the other. Well, yeah, but you have a sales team. You have an accounts receivable, a bookkeeper that's in charge of making sure you're getting paid and those type of things. That's still the internal perspective that we're talking about today of, you are going to have to do collections, whether you are a multinational, gigantic company, Fortune 50 company, or you're, a mom and pop shop. You still have to make this all work. And you're right. In putting it all together, it makes so much more sense to kind of put it all together and do it from one side to the other, rather than, oh, now you're dealing with, Sue from collections when you've been dealing with Bob from sales from, day one. And now you don't know what you're doing as a pump company that owes somebody money. So love seeing that. So talking a little bit about getting to collections. Okay. Let's say we've done it. Everything was going well. And let's say it's one of those companies that was problematic, wasn't problematic. And now we're having a problem with them. You have talked about, and when we were prepping for this, you told me about inactive and active plans. So I found this really interesting, and I think folks out here will benefit from it. So give me, what's the difference? Why do they matter? Why should you have both, or should you have both? All those kind of give me the skinny on inactive and active collection plans.
Yeah, so absolutely. One of the things that I always have to say to myself, and especially when I was, developing these, what I call payment plans, workout plans, whatever, choice word you want to use there, is deciding, okay, do I want that customer to go forward with me, or do I want to stop the bleed and sever the relationship? And what I will caution everybody that's on the webinar today is be prepared if you're severing the relationship, that the, I I don't know what the right word, the need to want to pay you goes away, right? Or gets significantly decreased because they look at it like, oh, well, if you don't want my business anymore, I'll go take it somewhere else. And I may need to prepay them, or I may need to, prioritize them. So I actually preach that my biggest recommendation is to do what's called an active payment plan. And that's looking at what are they spending with you on a 4 to 6 week average and coming up with that number first. So that number is going to be your starting in this formula, your starting number. That's the bare minimum of just keeping them from not adding to the bill, right? They're still doing business with me, but we're not going to keep adding to the bill. Then what I want to do is take a look at the total past due and then divide that out by about 6 weeks. I like to start with 6 weeks. That's my rule of thumb. You obviously can end up in 8 and 12 and so forth and so on. Whatever it is you're comfortable with from an extension of credit risk, divide that out and then add that to the original active number. And that's what you need as the bare minimum to go forward, because that's what's going to have you not continuing to add to the past due, starting to take some hits of that past due, plus taking on and continuing with that customer. Second piece of this is, again, going back to the inactive payment plan. So the formula difference here is that I'm not looking at the 4 to 6 week average spend. I'm just going in and looking at, okay, well, what are they at as far as the past due or total balance due today? And how long am I willing to extend this? And a lot of times, if we start with, again, 6 weeks or even 4 weeks, breaking it into installments, weekly or monthly, depending on our level of appetite for risk, we can really make this a number that they can afford to pay us. But again, I would caution that if you push on the inactive side, sometimes you just don't become the priority anymore. And so I really, as often as I can, I look to make it so. And from a sales perspective, we just talked about this, right? It's so important to keep this business too. I'm not, I'm going to come from my C-suite level here today and say, I want to keep that business and I want to keep that business with me long-term. So I want to come to them with how I can help them. And that's in active payment plan where I'm taking their active volume plus the past due. And over time, we work together, we get that resolved.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we've said it on other webinars and I think it bears repeating, the sale isn't complete until you actually get paid.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a good plan in place to make that happen, then you didn't really complete the sale. The deal didn't actually close because the money didn't exchange hands in the right way. So there's always that to consider. And, somebody's commenting here saying, the other concern is to look at how you get badmouthed, especially, here in 2020 and, in the last few years, especially with the growth of social media and all of that. I mean, I literally have been standing in a cell phone store where no one would help me, tweeted out that I'm standing in store number, whatever, and no one helped me, and had somebody come from the back going, who is this guy that just tweeted this out, within 2 to 3 minutes, because they did not want that bad press out there that this was going on. So as somebody who handles brand and content and social media for a company, I completely understand that, we don't want people to do that. And for folks that do that, we're trying to engage with them, so that's where, like you were saying, that inactive can be beneficial. It may need to be happening, but it also can be one of those, like, if you're going to cut off business with them and just try and get a payment plan, this could be a little tough too.
I think it's such a great point you bring there. I'm gonna add to it. You want to have that talk track to be, hey, listen, if we can't come up with a number that financially takes into account what you're spending with us plus what's past due, then short term, and that's how I would say it, is I want to, stop the service just so we can get this resolved. And then once we get down the past due to X amount, I'll be comfortable to kind of add that back in and we can put in an active payment plan. But for now, while I hate to see the business go elsewhere, I really don't want to let you to keep digging a hole. And I've had these conversations over the years. Like, right. I remember very specifically a very large company owing, over $1 million, and saying to them, listen, I want your business. I want your business every single week, but it's very clear to me that we're not making headway on the past due. So what I want to do is have you transition that business, or if we can hold on sending it right now, and get this resolved, and let's get it down a little bit and then put it back on. And trust me, nobody wants to have that business added on more than I do. So, and you level with people, generally speaking, they hear you're being empathetic, they hear you're being genuine, and they want to give that to you in return. So they actually appreciate that you're not letting them go to a hole of no return.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a few questions here. I've got a few more questions. We're going to kind of just bounce around to them. So I'm not going to call out people by name, but we're going through all these different ones. So what if, with what you just said, what if somebody says, okay, cool. Yeah. Or before they're like, hey, you call them the first time. Hey, so you're overdue. Everything okay? And they're like, yeah, just put me on hold. I don't care. That's the only way you're going to get any money from me anyway. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great true life question. So the answer I would have to that is to level set with them and say, listen, I don't want to see you go on hold. So let's really talk this out. Do you have some time real quick for us to talk this out? And then I'm digging deeper. I'm saying, talk to me about what's going on. What's going on with your sales? I'm looking to hear kind of buzzwords. Are we having some cash flow issues? Do they need help collecting their receivables? I can't tell you how many times over the years, and you'll get a chuckle out of this, where when my customers have fallen past due, I've helped them by coaching them on how to help get their customers to pay them so they could pay me.
Right.
Including recommending, a third-party agency. Like, hey, you want to know who we use? Let me give you their name.
Help you, help me. Like, let's do this together. Yes.
Exactly. So it's understanding what is really going on and saying to them, let me figure out a way that we can work this out together. I don't want to see you go on hold. I hear you that that's the only option, but is it really the only option? Let's look at kind of what's going on in the business. And maybe at that point you're hearing words like, oh, we're having, we're looking at filing bankruptcy. Obviously, we've talked about that in other webinars.
Mm-hmm.
I won't touch it, but that's going to have a different reaction from me. You could hear cash flow issues. You could hear a breakup in the partnership, maybe a business dissolve, those kind of things. So you really want to dig deeper and not just go, oh, okay, let me shut you off now. Here's your inactive payment plan, and we'll just part ways. No, I mean, again, it really goes with people can say things that they don't really mean, and I really want to understand. Help me help you. And again, I'm going to pop a slide up here because it seems like the perfect spot for this one. So give it a second here. But again, I'm being compassionate, right? I want the debtor to know we get it. Times are tough. I'm understanding what's going on, what's happening in their business today. You heard me talk about
empathy. Katie.
Yeah.
As much as we love seeing the beautiful picture of your family, I think you're sharing the wrong screen in your multi-screen setup.
Well, I appreciate you telling me that.
It's a great picture. I appreciate the look at, inside of what's going on in your life, but I'm thinking that you wanted us to see something else, not that. I'm guessing it was something more like this.
Yes. So appreciate you telling me that.
Of course.
That's my beautiful family.
There you go.
So we talk about empathy, right? And you can see here, we want to ensure the tone of our delivery is empathy versus accusatory. We have reasoning. We want to level with them. We want to be the voice of reason. We want to be relatable, and we want to have options and resolution. And so somebody who says to me, oh my gosh, I'm just, shut me off, we're done.
Yeah.
That just is somebody coming from a very emotional state. And I really want to, if now's not the time for us to have this conversation, what time works best for you? I really want to help you and understand how we can work together.
Absolutely. So with that being the case, how do you go about training yourself, your collections teams, your whoever's doing this? How do you go about doing that? Do you, is there like courses to buy that you suggest, or are you internally training, or is it some amalgamation of all that? Are we YouTubing this? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. So, I'm obviously making sure that my team is being trained from the start, because again, I believe long-term that we have to come out of the gates with teaching our collectors that we need to have empathy. There's absolutely training out there. I'm a big proponent of Mary Shores, who actually is on the consumer side with her Collections Advantage program.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you know that I've been hounding her because I've taken that course from the consumer side, and it is definitely relatable to business.
Sure.
So definitely a big fan of her course. And then really just, getting the process nailed down and having a process. Do you know how many companies don't have a full collections process? So their collectors need this conversation. They need this additional training. And really kind of saying, okay, guys, what is going to be our collections process? How do we want to make sure it's handled from call 1 to call 4? In my case, I like to have call 1 to call 4. Everybody processes differently. But being able to really get to the point where I'm able to make a decision at a relatively timely fashion that it needs to go to third party, I've exhausted my options.
Yeah, absolutely. And, folks, just so you know too, and I'm going to give some shameless plugs because, hey, it's our webinar and we can. We have a bunch of webinars on collections, on best practices, specific instances, all that type of stuff. We also have some blogs on the same thing, blog posts on the same thing, including one written by Katie on letter series, on how to do a effective and efficient letter series that can go out to accounts that you need to collect on. So we have all of that. I will go ahead and make sure that we include that in the landing page that you'll get linked to in the email. So all those will be linked there. You won't have to write any of these down. I'm not going to give you a bunch of web addresses or anything, but you will have all that there, and you can link out to those other things if you want to use that for yourself, for your own education and build your own thing, or if you want to use that for your team so that they can understand what's going on a little bit more. Hopefully we can be here to help you with that. So we've got all that going. And before we jump into any more just open-ended questions, I really want to just get this. And I tend to ask this at the end, this, but like, what's the advice? What is the best thing, or the best couple of things, the best practices, however you want to say it, that you can give to a company right now who's dealing with an onslaught of new overdue payments and collections during the pandemic? Maybe they've dealt with them in the past, they had a good thing, but now there's just more of them, or they're different, or maybe they haven't dealt with a lot of them in the past and now they're dealing with them. Whatever the case, what are your like, hey, across the board, this is going to help, tips, practices, whatever you want to call them?
Yeah. So first one I would say is take a look at the date of last payment. That is a big trigger for me and how I kind of structure my strategy or my treatment for how I want to approach the debt. If I've gotten a payment in the last 30 days, guess what? As bad as it sounds, that's not going to be my top priority right now. I want to make sure everybody's gotten a payment within the last 30 days. And if I haven't, I need to find out why I haven't. And then I would say the next piece is making sure that I'm not overextended. So I'm taking a look at what are they spending with us weekly, monthly, biweekly, whatever it is, and making sure that I'm not just digging that grave that they're just not going to be able to get out of, and really going back to my sales team if they are and saying, listen, if we let so-and-so keep going through in the way that they are, they're going to get to the point of no return, and I just don't want to see them get there, and I know you don't. So let's go call them and see what kind of conversations we can have and work out proactively. And then the third piece I would say is being proactive versus reactive. Go and have those conversations about payment plans. Tell them that you really want to see that volume continue with you, or that business continue with you, but you need to get something in exchange to doing that. Don't be afraid to, have automatic payment plans where you're processing the payment versus having to call them. That makes the resources not be as tight, because once you get that agreement, and I like to get these things in writing, I always say start with the end in mind. If I have it in writing and I have the agreement signed and I'm just processing that payment weekly, bi-weekly, and I can get that done for 70% of the customers that are past due, now I can really focus on the ones that are 30% that we need to figure out, okay, are we calling them every other week? What's the ones that aren't willing to give us those payment plans? And then, like I said, and I go back to help me help you, take that approach, be willing to coach your collectors, to have that empathy, to have that understanding, to listen. So many of our collectors, sometimes they get uncomfortable in these conversations. The best aren't. The best are willing to just sit there with a pen and paper and talk to the CEO or talk to the CFO and say, talk to me about what's going on. The more information you give me, the more I can either, help you or go back to my superiors and come back with a plan that works for both sides.
Mm-hmm. So we have a bunch of questions coming in because it's a hot topic. There's no way around it, and you obviously know what you're talking about. So first thing is, how involved do you keep the sales staff when you get into collections? So you talked about setting it up properly in the beginning, but when we get to collections, what are they still involved? Do you suggest that they're involved? How do you? I'm expanding on this question, but still, is that something? Where do you come in on that?
Yeah, so my advice is actually to keep them involved. And here's why. You want to sound like you're in stereo when you're talking to a customer and you're lockstep with one another. This is one of those crucial areas. If your salesperson is contacting them and saying to them, oh, I need to, I want to sell you the next, product that we have, or renew your services, or depending on, again, product versus service, they're pushing them for sales, but they're not aware that they're having financial issues. You guys just you look disjointed and you don't look like you're lockstep with one another. But if you come and you say, hey, Mary, on the sales side, let's set an appointment up or a phone call with this person. They're having some issues. I think we can work it out together. Now you've got the salesperson in the know, who's not backdooring conversations, right? And then you also look like a combined, in stereo group that's coming to them with solutions versus just being disjointed. Best word I can come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get 100%
That's
what
a
you're
great
saying.
question. That's a really great question. And I'm a big, amongst my biggest fans, there's the salespeople, as you know. And I think it's
right.
I really don't cut them out of the picture.
Right.
I just don't believe in that.
Well, and they built all that time building a relationship too. They spent all that time building that relationship, and sometimes they have a better voice into that company than the collector does, or just an accounts receivable clerk does, or something like that. You may have spent a lot more time with them, so it makes total sense. And you said Mary, and you had mentioned Mary Shore, and I'm just going to take a little tangent here. You said she's doing does consumer stuff, but she is going to be doing some commercial stuff with us coming up in March. So just everybody mark your calendars, check out our website for upcoming webinars. But Mary will be doing some blog posts and some webinar stuff and everything with us coming up in March. So you will get to know her a little bit better as well through us. And then you can get to know her with all the cool stuff she does. So more questions here. Speaking of active payments, when we're talking about this, and you just mentioned, I want to get this in writing, however we do this. Do you use like a set thing? Are we using an online thing, or are we actually getting a lawyer or a legal team or the legal department or whatever involved to draft this agreement?
Yeah, no, it doesn't need to be a legal agreement. I'm a big fan of, you make this easier to understand for the customer, the better off you are. I definitely just put together a template on our company letterhead that really outlined exactly how many weeks it is, what the dollar amount was, if it included active versus inactive, it was a check mark. And at the bottom of it, I would capture payment information so that I could get it on automatic, or, I would select how they were going to be making those payments and get a signature from somebody that's authorized. And that's really just your exchange of commitments. So I would sign it, they would sign it, and we would go on from there.
Gotcha. It makes total sense. Yeah. So, talking about all the things that we've talked about here, question is basically, I still want these people to pay. So it's great that I understand, but how do I still get them to pay?
Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to having them have options. If you come to the table and are just like, I need to get paid, and you just keep, I always said, hitting them over the head with a hammer, and you're just calling, and your collector's just calling, you're threatening service suspension, and you're just delivering the same message over and over again and expecting a different result. First of all, it's a definition of insanity. And second of all, you're not going to get a different result. But if you, take the approach of a couple of different things. One, maybe that collector that's been calling them isn't the right fit for the account. Switch it up, put a fresh voice on that. Have somebody else make the phone call. Two, make sure that you're working with sales in delivering the message so that the options are very clear from a sales perspective. Oh, wow, we really are giving them a lot of options. Maybe I've got a stronger relationship with the CEO. The controller just isn't able to pull the trigger right now due to their cash flow issues. Let me get the CEO in the conversation, right? And then I would say 3, making sure that you have multiple options, not just one. So I tend to go into the conversation depending on why are we not getting paid, right? If it's a dispute or service, you got to be willing to compromise. Unless you want to stand your ground to the point where you're ready to go legal, there's no reason for it. Come up with a compromise and come up with an understanding of what is it worth to your customer, what is it worth to you to go forward. But if it's really just a matter of I don't have the money today, then really try your hardest to come up with options for them. Maybe it's splitting some on a credit card, putting it in, on check, a mix of those things. Making sure that you have options is always going to be key.
Yeah, great. We've got one more question here that I'm seeing, and it is, I've kind of held it because it's a perfect segue towards the end, towards our next webinar as well. So I don't, that you can be the teaser of what's going to happen. I should. I mean, we should send some credit safe swag to this person.
I agree.
But when do you know it's time, and what is the benefit of going to a third party? When is it ready? Like, look, I can't handle this myself anymore. I'm spending too much effort, time, whatever, and I need to go outside of the company. And what are the benefits? Which is a lot of what's going to be on the webinar. But if you could give a teaser for it, I'd appreciate it.
I will definitely give a teaser. The next webinar is going to be, if you're not signed up, whoever's asking this question, definitely be signed up because you're going to get a lot more than what I'm going to give you. But really, it's knowing that you've exhausted all the options. When I just talked about making sure you give multiple options, it's really going, okay, I've exhausted all my options. Generally speaking, one of my biggest rules of thumb, if they've stopped communicating, if they've just cold turkey stopped communicating, that's a rule for me that if we don't have an open line of communication, we can't go forward. I need to give it to. And again, when I give something to a third party, my understanding is they're using resources and tools that I haven't made an investment in, or it's just not where my focus needs to be because I got to focus on the active customers, right?
Right.
And then two, it's if they aren't making good on their promises. So again, if you've gotten that exchange of commitments, maybe you've gotten that payment plan, but every week they're calling and saying, I know I said I could do 5,000 this week. I can only do 1,500. One time I call that okay. You can give them a mulligan. But if you get to 2 and 3, then you don't have a good exchange of commitment. So I then would say, go back to the drawing table, renegotiate it. Or if it's just, hey, they can't commit to it, you have to come to terms. If it can't be an inactive or an active, you gotta move forward, and you just have to say, I don't want to see this happen. I gave you the bare minimum I can take. Generally speaking, I can't come up with what that number would be for each company because it's just so different. But I would be saying, generally speaking, I've given you all my options, and we can't go forward. And those are really the key ones. I think you'll get a lot more in the next webinar. But for me personally, where I would say, it's time to cut bait and move on.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into our next webinar. And Katie, as always, thank you. I have a great time talking with you and I always learn so much. So it's been great. And folks, the next webinar that we keep talking about is on Thursday of this week, November 5th, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. We've got a whole panel of collections experts that are working with outside agencies and firms and going to give you a whole thing about that. You can find that either in the email that you're going to get or at creditsafe.com/webinars. You can check out all of our upcoming webinars there. And once again, Katie, it's always a pleasure. Enjoy your time up in Pennsylvania with your family. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate Credit Safe, and thank you everybody for attending today.
Yeah, and just like Katie said, thanks everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.